Welcome to First In, Last Out, and Laughing Loudest, the podcast dedicated to leading from the front the joy of the Lord, creating Christian culture, and God-glorifying dominion. Welcome to another episode of First In, Last Out, and Laughing Loudest. My segment for today is riffing off of the title of another podcast. So the main idea I want to get at here is that stories are soul food. Stories are soul food. Stories are powerful. Stories shape us. And what we need to understand is that they will be shaping us whether we're conscious of it or not. So for us, when listening to or watching stories or reading stories, right, we're talking books, movies, audiobooks, whatever, we both naturally and inevitably tend to identify with the protagonists, with the main characters. We picture ourselves in the story. We tend to map stories onto our own lives. We tend to internalize lessons and story arcs and relate them to ourselves. If I could give an example of how this works in a positive way, myself, like many evangelicals, grew up on a very healthy diet of Bible stories and VeggieTales. Now, VeggieTales certainly didn't always nail the moral of every story, but I will say in their telling of the story of the fiery furnace, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they end with a really catchy song that I think is a pretty decent application of the story, a song that stuck with me all my life. I won't sing it for you now, but the chorus goes, I remember to stand up for what you believe in. Believe in God. He's the one who backs you up. That's not a bad takeaway from that story, right? If you don't know it, the Bible story, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, friends of Daniel, refused to bow down to Nebuchadnezzar's idol. He made a big statue and demanded everybody worship it. And they said, well, no, first and second commandment are kind of a thing. We're not going to worship your God no matter what you do to us. And so Nebuchadnezzar throws them into this fiery furnace and God saves them. They don't get burnt at all. So the lesson there, right? If you do the right thing, stand up for what you believe in, even if it's going to come at the cost of your own life. And in this story, God saved these three men. Right. So here's the kind of the question you can ask for yourself. You apply that, you map yourself onto this, you map that story onto your life. Will you have the courage to stand up and do the right thing when challenged? Right? When your faith is challenged, when you know the right thing, but it's hard. Great lesson. But here's the thing. Not every story that you take in is going to have a nice catchy song at the end to make it explicit, to make it clear to you what the moral of that story is. However, the fact that it doesn't have a song doesn't mean that the story doesn't still have a message. Right? Stories are soul food. Here's my another hat tip to N.D. Wilson, one of my favorite authors. Stories can either be nourishing as soul food. They can be good for you. They can feed your soul in ways that are going to be edifying. Think of it like, good whole food for the soul. Some stories are like that. Or they can be like junk food. You think of a bag of Doritos, probably fine as the occasional snack, but something that would probably leave you sick and malnourished if it was the majority of your diet. There are some stories like that. They don't go very deep. They don't have any great meaning. It's not going to impact you for life, but it's probably not going to hurt you too much either. And then there are stories that are just poisonous to your soul. Now, as we talk about stories, I just want to give a quick point of explanation. When I speak of things that are poisonous, I am not only talking about movies or stories that have filthy content, right? Not just filthy content. I think that's one place where evangelicals tend to get snookered. We tend to think that as long as there is no cursing or nudity or violence, right? That is, that if a movie is clean in the ways that rating boards describe it, well, then that means that a film or a story must be wholesome. And I think that's kind of those are the categories we use, right? If it doesn't have cursing, if it doesn't have, the things that give it a PG-13 or an R rating, then the story must be wholesome. I think that is tragically naive and tragically common. Give maybe a funny example of this. So when I was a kid, Winkler used to have a Christian bookstore. And one of the things that they did at this Christian bookstore is they would sell edited versions of secular music. And so I had a friend whose parents were Christians. They were like quite conservative as far as what they wanted their son to be able to listen to. But he went to this Christian bookstore and bought a 50-cent album. I don't remember which one it was. But if you know anything about 50 Cent, like this was gangster rap. But it was bought at this Christian bookstore, and so it was totally edited, which meant that they either bleeped or blanked out all of the cursing. All right, so all the bad words were removed from this 50 Cent album. Or I should say all the bad words. All the words we consider curses or, cuss words were all taken out. But here's the problem. That album was still a gangster rap album. Right? You take out all the bad words and the content of the songs, the things that the songs are actually about hasn't actually changed. Right? These are still songs that are about, well, the kinds of things that gangster rap is about. I won't go into more detail than that. And I think we can have the same problem when we come to movies, right? As long as it's clean, as long as it doesn't have, those, violence, nudity, swearing, then we think it's a clean movie. It must be a wholesome movie. It must be good soul food for us. What I think we need to learn to do as Christians is to learn to go deeper, to evaluate and ask, what is the message of the movie or the book? Right? What is this movie? What is this story communicating? What is the worldview? What is the story arc? Maybe what are the themes being explored? What do the storytellers communicate about the choices of the characters? Now, I'm going to apologize. I know this sounds suspiciously similar to English class. And I know there are also some people out here who are going to roll their eyes right now and say, Riley, just let me watch my movie in peace. Oh, just let me enjoy this. Like you must be so much fun at parties. You kill joy you want to critically analyze, my book or my movie here. And you know what? I will just say it might be true. If you adopt what I'm advocating for, it might ruin some movies or books that you would have otherwise enjoyed. But I'm going to tell you that I think if it does ruin them, those actually aren't stories that you really wanted to be taking in anyway. So I'll say sorry, not sorry for that. But I'll also say if you learn to do this, what I'm going to advocate for, it might also help you enjoy some stories even more than you ever did before. So before I put you to sleep, let's get to some examples. I think this is really where it comes to life, is when we see it in action. So most people know the story of The Lion King. I had seen it as a kid, but truthfully, I actually enjoyed it even more as we watched it recently with our kids. So I can use Lion King. Most of us know what are the themes in this movie. I think it's somewhat ironic that many people don't even realize that the movie in the end completely repudiates and rejects the central message of everyone's favorite song in The Lion King. Right? What am I talking about? Well, obviously, it's Hakuna Matata. Right? Everybody loves this part. It's no worries. It means no worries for the end of your days. And actually, the movie is the full repudiation of Hakuna Matata. That's the message of The Lion King, and I'll prove my point here. So Simba, he has the option, he has the opportunity for himself. Just live with your goofball buddies. Have no responsibility. Do what you want. Live for yourself. And he's got a kind of a freedom there in this place where he's, okay, maybe not quite what a lion was meant for. He's eating bugs. He's eating grubs. He's not, with any other lions, but hey, there's no responsibility, there's no danger. He can just live for himself. But he also realizes he knows it still. He's not living up to his potential. Then one day, Nala, the lioness, Simba's childhood friend, finds him here in his paradise of hedonistic nihilism, and tells him that he is actually desperately needed. He is desperately needed. They need his strength. They need his leadership. They need him to live up to his potential. What's the line in the other song there? Why won't he be the king I know he is, the king I see inside? And so he's now got this choice. He's got this opportunity. He can stay here and continue in this hedonistic, garden of pleasure with Timon and Pumbaa, or he can return, face his past, and defeat his treacherous uncle and get to be king. All right, so what's the story arc there? Right? What's the option before him? Well, it's a really old one, and it's a fantastic one. The storyline there is kill the dragon and get the girl. Right? The story basically hinges on this point. It's kind of the crux of the movie is Simba's decision, right? What's he going to choose? Well, we see he doesn't want to go back. He wants to stay with his buddies, and he kind of just wants Nala to stay with him there. But she is not at all impressed by this version of him, right? When she knew him as a young cub, he was all fired up to go and be king, to grow and be like his father, Mufasa, who was a tough and strong and respectable leader. And so she's not at all impressed with this version of him who is just going to choose to live selfishly when there's people who need him. And so Simba then has this little journey of self-discovery. He remembers, actually, he's the son of a king, and he needs to start acting like it. And so he does. He goes to challenge Scar. He ultimately defeats him, becomes the king, and because Simba takes responsibility, things get better for the people that he loves. Instead of being just a waste of space pursuing his own pleasure, he takes responsibility, faces his demons, so to speak, shoulders the burden, and things get better for everyone, himself included. So what's the message of the movie? Well, I think it's basically reject narcissism, take responsibility, right? The Hakuna Matata, the nihilism, live for yourself, no worries. Well, no worries, no responsibilities. That also means no meaning, right? No meaning at all. You're just living for yourself, and you're pretty useless, to be honest. So the message is reject that. Reject narcissism, reject nihilism, take responsibility, kill the dragon and get the girl. And then you can tell, a big part of the message of the story can be seen in how things turn out. Like I mentioned, the storytellers don't always give you a catchy song to tell you the moral of the story. You can often see what the message of the story is by looking at how particular decisions turned out for various characters. And things obviously end up very well for Simba in that he chose to go and take responsibility. To give another example, this one's probably not quite as well known, but this idea of looking at how the storytellers are giving their approval or not to the decisions of the characters. Diana and I watched the movie called The Prestige recently. And that movie, I think, is basically a cautionary tale. It's quite interesting. It draws you in. A lot of twists and turns. I won't try to spoil it for you in case you do want to watch it. But it's about pride. It's about revenge. It's about rivalry. The main character has chance after chance just to walk away from this rivalry, but he gets totally obsessed by it. Without wanting to spoil it, his obsession ends up destroying him. So what's the message of the movie? I think it's maybe something like don't cling to bitterness, something like rivalry and revenge are actually destructive. Well, those are the kinds of questions we need to be asking, right? What is the message of the movie? What are they communicating? And yeah, those are the questions we need to be asking. I'll give one more example to press home why this really matters. So there's a kids movie called Smallfoot. Smallfoot. This one, I don't know when it came out exactly. But the storyline goes like this. There's a society of Yeti, abominable snowmen, Yeti, that live in a mountaintop civilization above the clouds, and they have a priestly figure who's called the Stonekeeper. He is the keeper of the sacred stones. These are these tablets on which all of their sacred laws are inscribed. These laws keep the Yeti living in the village. The assertion is that humans, the Smallfoot, they call humans the Smallfoot. Smallfoot is a myth. The whole village is very superstitious. They follow the words of the sacred stones with a religious devotion. Well, the story goes that the main character accidentally falls outside the village, where he witnesses a plane crash, and then he finds a Smallfoot. He finds a human. When he goes and tells the village about what he saw, he is banished for lying. He's banished for lying because we know there is no such thing as a Smallfoot. Well, the movie progresses, and the main character, Migo, he discovers a human village after he's banished, and he kidnaps a human, a Smallfoot, to bring back to the Yeti village to try to clear his name, I guess. But the big plot twist in the movie is when, here, I don't care if I spoil this one, but the big plot twist is when Migo discovers that the Stonekeeper has actually known about humans all along, and he knows that the laws on the sacred stones are all lies. That's right. In fact, the Stonekeeper, in some cases, has just been making them up as he goes along. The story then ends with the whole-scale rejection of the stones and their whole religious system. The Yeti is now branching out to make contact with humans. All right. So there's the story. Now, with your new critical lens to evaluate this, what's the message of the story? What are the story beats that we can pick up on? Well, I think the main thing that stands out to me is that we have laws treated as divine, written even on stone tablets. Sometimes it's a little too on the nose, isn't it? Okay, now what happens? Well, those laws actually just turn out to be lies that are being used to control the people, and to top it off, the religious leader himself knew about it. Right? The Stonekeeper himself didn't actually believe what he was preaching to everybody else. He was just using this to manipulate and control the people through fear. What kind of a storyline is that? That sounds to me an awful lot like what your kids are going to be told by their atheist philosophy professor in their freshman year of college, if you so choose to send them there. But this is a really common idea amongst the atheists, isn't it? Right? I've heard this. I can think of songs that say this explicitly. Organized religion is really just a bunch of lies being used to control people. And the elites at the top, they know that it's all lies, but it's a convenient way to control the masses. Right? That, I think, is the storyline of the movie. Those are the story beats, right? And so you're watching a movie like this. What's your takeaway? What's your message? Is like, oh, well, we need to challenge the old ways. We need to be open-minded and willing even to reject those things which our, ancestors have handed down to us as if they are from on high, as if they are from above, and just be willing to, question and investigate the truth no matter where it goes. It's like, that is an Enlightenment story, right? That is the story of atheistic Enlightenment ideology and the rejection of religion. Now, all of this might be where you'd expect the pastor to say, see how dangerous movies are, see how dangerous stories are. Don't ever let your kids watch anything or read anything that's not made by Christians, right? Because you never know what the storyline is going to be. So it's better if you just bubble wrap them and keep them away. Well, if you know me well, you know that's actually not what I'm about to say. That's not what I'm driving at all. Because here's the thing, your kids are going to encounter stories. You are going to encounter stories. And you and your kids are going to be shaped by stories. All of that is entirely inevitable. I'm not saying you should just pull yourself away from everything and bubble wrap your family. I'm not telling you to avoid them. What I'm driving at is that we need to learn for ourselves and train our kids to know how to interpret stories, right? To be able to spot the lies in the stories when they're there. To learn to identify worldviews in stories, asking what the message is so that you can then critically evaluate it, rather than just having these messages, these stories shape us, just sink into our psyches unconsciously, right? That's always the biggest danger, is that it's when we're unaware of the propaganda, it's when we're unaware that what we're watching is propaganda, that it has the strongest impact upon us. So what I'm pushing for is that we'd learn to be educated movie watchers. I'm not against stories. What I am against is Christians being indoctrinated because they didn't equip themselves to become wise consumers of stories. What I'm against is ignorance that would make us into easy prey for those who would want to influence us with their hatred of God. So what I'm pushing for is that we learn to ask the right kinds of questions, right? What is the message? What's the story doing? What's it communicating? Are the authors giving their approval to the decisions of the characters? Do the authors reward evil decisions with happy, joy-filled lives, right? You think of this. This is actually the trap of many romance movies. They get you cheering for adultery, right? They make you cheer for adultery. And you see, oh, that poor girl, she just needed to have that adulterous affair and divorce her husband because he was the thing standing in the way of her and her happily ever after. And, oh yeah, let's make him a jerk so that we don't feel too bad about this. And, he had everything coming to him. It's like, well, if she does that, if she cheats on her husband and divorces him and gets a happily ever after, that is a story that is telling lies. Even if there somehow was no cursing and no violence and no nudity or sex scenes, that story is still poison to your soul, right? That's a story that tells lies because this is just not how things work in God's world. You could even watch a movie that follows the same story beats, but is actually telling the truth. And it all has to do with the perspective, right? And what do the movie makers say about it by the end? So if you had a story of a woman who does the exact same things as in a romantic movie like this, but instead of her getting a happy ending, it follows the perspective maybe of her children, who are absolutely devastated. It follows the fallout as the lives of everyone are destroyed by this woman's selfishness in her own pursuit of her hedonistic lusts and self-centered narcissism. And that could be a true story because that's the way things go in God's world. And that would be a story, maybe it wouldn't be my favorite kind of story to watch, but it would at least be a cautionary tale that's telling the truth about the way God made the world and the way things actually work. And the take-home lesson there is don't be selfish and ruin your life and the life of your children and your husband. So the romance movie that has the person making wicked choices and then gets a happily ever after, that's soul poison. That's a story telling lies. So learn to ask the right questions. Let us be critical readers and movie watchers and story listeners. Talk about the worldview elements with your kids or with your spouse. Always remember, stories are soul food. This is First In, Last Out, Laughing Loudest.
Whatever.
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 Whatever. Whatever.
Whatever.
Whatever.
This segment is brought to you by Little Pilgrim Coffee Roasters. Little Pilgrim is a small, family-owned coffee roaster desiring to honor the one true and living God in all things. Little Pilgrims is roasted locally here in southern Manitoba, and right now, first-time buyers who mention that they were sent by the First In, Last Out, Laughing Loudest podcast will receive 20% off of their first order. Go to Little Pilgrim Coffee on Instagram and get 20% off your first order. Welcome to Whatever, the segment of the podcast that I use to talk about things that don't fit neatly into any of my other segment types. We are in the Easter season now, as we are looking forward to the celebration of our Lord's resurrection. And I came across a clip that I thought would be useful for us as we continue to prepare our hearts and minds, looking forward to Resurrection Sunday. I know for us, we try to make it clear that every Sunday is a celebration of the resurrection, but I do think it is worthwhile to follow the time of the year in which Christ would have been crucified, right? Which, of course, is connected to the Jewish Passover. So I came across this. This is a clip from a gentleman named Alex O'Connor. He is an influencer, a YouTuber, and he is an outspoken atheist who, interestingly, has been talking to people about Christianity and particularly a lot about Jesus. And I came across this clip of him interacting with some of the historical facts about the resurrection, which are, I think, quite compelling as evidences. And I thought it would be useful for us to interact with and kind of get our minds going down this in this direction as we prepare ourselves for Easter. So I'll play some of his comments and then I'll pause and talk about them.
It is a fascinating mystery, something very strange happened on Easter morning. Because how do we explain the fact that this man gets crucified by the Romans and then people claim to see him after he died? And we're willing to be put to death for that belief.
So he starts off with this excellent question, and that is, how do we explain what happened on that first Easter morning? So there are some facts which I think virtually everyone agrees about. You know, even people who don't accept the Bible as true, as accurate, because they think that the authors are biased. But there are some facts that virtually everyone agrees on. And just for the record, I consider myself a presuppositionalist. I'm not saying we should put Scripture aside in order to just, use logic and reason from a place of neutrality. That's actually not possible, as I'll argue later. But I do think this is interesting to look at and say, even people who don't accept everything in the Scriptures have these there are these bare facts that you have to give an explanation for. And here is an atheist who is wrestling with this. Jesus really was crucified. And almost nobody denies that one. I know it is actually common among certain groups of Muslims to deny it, because the Quran actually says something to that effect, that he was only made to look like he was crucified. Plan to interact with that one on a future episode, either of this podcast or of Ask a Pastor. But almost nobody denies that Jesus was crucified. It's basically the best verified historical fact ever. Even like the radical skeptics who are, doing their Jesus seminar stuff and denying that Jesus said basically anything that he said in the Gospels, they will at least agree on this, that Jesus of Nazareth was a real human being who really walked this earth, and that he was crucified under Pontius Pilate. Like that is the bare minimum, one of the best attested historical events ever. And then here's the first piece of evidence that demands an explanation. Many people claimed to have seen him after he died. And Alex even mentions, and they were willing to be put to death for that belief. So how do you account for this? Right, if you were to examine the historical evidence, come up with a theory, what actually happened? How can you explain these facts? And Alex continues here.
Okay, maybe he didn't die. Unlikely. As they say, the Romans knew how to kill people. Okay, so likelihood is that he was actually crucified.
So the theory here, this one is called the swoon theory, right? So this is people trying to give an account for these historical facts, trying to give some explanation for the empty tomb, for the claims, for what happened historically, right? People who don't want to believe Jesus really rose from the dead. Well, here's one of the theories. It's, well, maybe he didn't actually die. This is called the swoon theory. So this theory goes that Jesus simply passed out from the pain, was taken off the cross, still just barely clinging to life. And Alex observes, well, that's unlikely. He says the Romans knew how to kill people. That may even be an understatement, right? You could say they made torturous executions into its own brutal art form. These were experts. They knew how to kill people. And let's just examine this claim further. Looking into what we know about crucifixion, we know that Jesus was flogged. And this flogging was very frequently nearly a death sentence, or sometimes it was even a death sentence in itself. So for the victims of crucifixion, you may know about this, but one of the instruments of flogging that would have been common would be a wooden handle with leather strips that would often have pieces of bone or broken pottery or metal embedded into the leather straps of this big flagellum, I think it's called. And so what would happen is the victim would be tied to a post, and his torturer would smack his back with this flagellum, and all those pieces of bone and pottery and nails and whatever else would embed themselves into the victim's back, and then the torturer would rip it off, and just chunks of flesh would come flying off. Right, so this is what happens in flogging, and it is nearly a death sentence in itself, and sometimes was. People would die just from the blood loss of this flogging, and so Jesus is. So here's the claim: Jesus survived this flogging. He then is nailed to a cross and left there, and survives crucifixion. But he passes out and is in such rough shape that the soldiers really believed he was actually dead. Even when this is one of the historical points is the Romans came to break the legs of the crucifixion victims, and they didn't break his legs because they believed he was already dead. And so this swoon theory says Jesus, didn't move. They thought he was dead. It doesn't even move when they pierced his side with a spear, and blood and water pours out of his side. And so they take him off the cross, lay him in a tomb, roll a stone in front of the tomb, and then set up their soldiers to guard. So let's just work this through. The swoon theory says that at some point, while in the tomb, he recovered consciousness, then somehow had the strength to roll the stone away from the entrance to the tomb, and then somehow either overpower or sneak past the Roman soldiers. Like, either they didn't hear this giant stone being moved from behind them. It's like these guys would have been on edge, right? Like they're guarding a tomb. There's all this excitement around what's all happened here. If you hear a giant stone moving behind you when you're on edge guarding at night, you're going to hear that. And so then I either sneak past them or overpower them, right, from this state. And then go find his disciples and then convince them that he had actually died but has now risen from the dead, right? Even just that last claim is just outrageous. So let's just imagine all these impossible things somehow happened. He survived flogging, survived crucifixion, survived the spear to the chest, then escaped out of his own tomb. Imagine he now shows up at your door. What condition is he in? Is there anything somebody like that could say that would make you believe, oh yes, you died and have now been raised from the dead, right? In this condition, he would look like a zombie or like a mummy, right? Still in his grave clothes, perhaps, right? He was wrapped in linen. for burial, right? There's been no time to heal from these wounds. Maybe there's some brutal scabbing. I don't know. If his heart had still been beating, then many of these wounds would likely still be bleeding. Would you believe for a second that such a person had actually been resurrected? Right? As you're with him and it's like, okay, you don't look so good. The swoon theory is just ridiculous on so many levels as you actually work through what it's really saying. And so Alex Connor dismisses that one out of hand, rightly so, saying maybe he survived, maybe he didn't die. That's unlikely. The Romans knew how to kill people. And, as you go deeper into this with the historical evidence, you just see how ridiculous that theory actually is.
Then a few days later, people are claiming to see him. Maybe they're lying, but then you don't tend to go to death for something you know to be a lie. You're willing to be put to death for things that you think are true, that are false. But very rarely are people willing to die for beliefs that they don't actually believe themselves. That doesn't really happen. So they probably weren't lying.
Now, this is one of the things which really sets the claims of the resurrection apart from the claims of other religions. So consider this. Someone like Muhammad or Joseph Smith. These are men who started their own religions, what we would say are their own cults. And what is the claim? Well, the claim these men made is that they were true prophets, that they heard from God. Now, people will sometimes say, all world religions are the same, as if they have equal footing, equal validity to their claims. I think there's a lot more we could say about that. But consider this one. This is one really significant point which sets the claims of Christianity apart. Alex mentions this. People will rarely be willing to be put to death for something that they know is a lie. He says people will die for things that they believe are true but are actually false, right? Where they've been deceived, they've been tricked by someone, but rarely will they die for things that they actually themselves know to be a lie. Now, I remember debating with somebody one time, pointing out the history of martyrdom in Christianity, even pointing to Jesus' own disciples. And someone responded, was like, well, yeah, but the Muslims have been willing to die for their faith too. You can't really point to that as any kind of real evidence. But here's the very big difference. Again, what's the claim of Islam? What's the claim that Muhammad makes? Well, the claim is that Muhammad was a prophet who heard from God. Now, if that's a lie, how many people know it's a lie? One. Just one, right? The conspiracy can rest on one person alone, Muhammad himself, convincing his followers that he is a true prophet. And so now you have those martyrs, those people, who are willing to die for their faith in Islam, deceived by Muhammad, right? If this is a lie, only one person needs to be in on the lie. You could do the same thing with Mormonism, right? Joseph Smith being a true prophet, that's the claim. Only one person needs to be in on that conspiracy. He just needs to convince other people that he's a real prophet. And you notice this is a claim that's non-falsifiable, right? It's not something you can go and investigate historically. There's no evidence for them to examine, right? How would they disprove it? A claim like that so-and-so heard from God. Now, just consider the difference between that and the Christian claims, right? So our central claim here, we're talking about with Easter, is that Jesus literally, physically, bodily rose from the dead. All right, and if that were a lie, how many people need to be in on it? Well, you have all the disciples, you have the entire early apostolic community, the women who reported what they saw, there was others. And furthermore, notice this one is a falsifiable claim, right? Very, very different than the claim that, well, God spoke to me. This one is a claim that could have been disproven. And so that kind of brings us back to this other historical fact here, just to consider. The tomb was empty, right? Jesus's tomb was empty. And the Jews and the Romans did not have the body of Jesus. But just think of it. If imagine the disciples are now deciding to tell this lie that Jesus rose from the dead, they're just going to come up with a story on their own. Well, if the Jews and Romans, all they need to do to shut this down is to go open the tomb, pull out the corpse, and say, this guy, this dead guy right here, he's the one you're claiming was raised from the dead. If they do that, then there is no such thing as Christianity. So historically, we know the Jews and the Romans did not have the body of Jesus. The empty tomb is one of these historical facts that we have to account for. So what then? Well, if we're saying it's a lie, we're going to go with the story reported immediately by the Jews that circulated already from the first century. The lie being that the disciples went and stole the body of Jesus while the guards were sleeping on duty for some reason. And again, just this one is laughable historically too. If you just look at the condition of the disciples after or during the arrest and crucifixion of Jesus, they were scattered. Right? Peter was, the bold one, and the one who had claimed he was willing to die for Jesus, and he ends up denying Jesus and calling down curses on himself in front of a servant girl, declaring that he had never even met the man. The disciples are all scared, scattered. Everybody except John left. John's the only one actually recorded at the cross of Christ while he's being crucified. Now you're saying this group of scared disciples came up with a plan to go and overpower the Roman guards there, steal the body of Jesus, and then make up this story that he had risen from the dead. Now, what Alex points out is that the disciples do not live and die like people who made up a lie. They do not live and die like people who made up a lie. If they knew it was a lie, why are they willing to be persecuted for it? And just to compare it now again to the other religions, this is a lie that requires all of them to be in on it. This is one that requires all of them to be in on it, right? It'd be very, very different if, let's say, Peter was the only one who claimed to see Jesus, and he just managed to convince everybody else, right? I saw the Lord, and he said he was going back to heaven, and he left us. He's gone now, but trust me, he really did rise from the dead. That would be that'd be a lot more similar to what we have in those other religions, right? Just one person in on it, and he just needs to convince everybody else, like Muhammad or Joseph Smith convincing people that they are true prophets. That's a very, very different claim. What we actually have is literally hundreds of people who saw Jesus after he was crucified, after he was laid in the tomb, after he rose from the dead. And then this big question, right? So you have these firsthand people, these people claiming to be eyewitnesses, right? Firsthand accounts, eyewitnesses of the risen Christ. And so the big question is, if it was a lie and they all knew it was a lie, why would they be willing to die for it? And you might think, well, why do people make up lies and start religions or cults? What are the human, motivations, right? You go to a court case, and one of the big things that you always have to prove in a court case is motive, right? Why? Why did they do it? We ask it for people starting cults. Is there ever anything in it for them? Yes. Money, admiration, sex, right? Women, power. You get your own little harem. You get to be, king of your own little world here. Those are the things that cult leaders usually attain. Jesus' disciples got none of those things. They got none of these things. You can't point to anything that cult leaders are normally after and say, look, this is why the disciples did it, right? They have every opportunity to just go back to their lives, right? It's like, okay, well, I guess we blew 3 years following this guy around. We thought he was going to be the Messiah, but he wasn't. He's dead. James and John, they can go back to their dad and go fishing, back to the family business. But no, that's not what they did. They received nothing that cult leaders would normally be after, right? They were poor, they were persecuted, they lived difficult lives, enduring many hardships. They had a message preaching holiness and self-denial and following the footsteps of Christ. They received absolutely none of the things that charlatans are typically after. None of the things that cult leaders are typically after. And so, as Alex observes here, the claim that they were lying, they were all in on this big conspiracy, is really not a valid historical option, given the way that they lived and died.
As maybe they were mistaken, fooled. Yeah. Now, imagine spending every single day with this person, living with this person, eating with this person, and then you've only seen him a few days ago. Or maybe they were hallucinating in groups. One of the earliest New Testament sources is the letters of Paul. And in one of those letters, Paul refers to Jesus having appeared to 500 people all at once. So you don't get group hallucinations like that. And so it doesn't seem like they were mistaken either. And so if they're not mistaken, they're not making it up. What explains the fact that these people claimed to see him after he had died?
So here's another theory. It is the hallucination theory, saying they didn't really see the risen Christ, but they just hallucinated and believed that they did. I love his skeptical question, saying, maybe they just hallucinated. He goes, in groups. And he references here 1 Corinthians 15. I'll read the section for you. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 3 to 8. Paul says, again, Paul writing some of the earliest documents after the time of Christ, Paul says, I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the scriptures. Here we're getting some of the meaning of the death of Christ. That he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, that is Peter, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me. So it's fascinating there. Paul says that Jesus appeared to more than 500 people on one occasion, right? Like 500 people saw him at once. And Paul mentions they're still alive. Why do that? Why say they're still alive? Well, that's an implicit encouragement for the Corinthians, if they're skeptical, to go and find those people. Now, again, that's not the kind of thing that you do if you've made up a lie, right? You don't write in the lifetime of eyewitnesses saying, look, go find those eyewitnesses. There's still people alive, right? You can travel to Jerusalem and you can find people right now who have seen the risen Christ. So this is 1 Corinthians. If you think of what that actually is historically, we just think of it as one of the books of the Bible, but this was originally a letter that was an eyewitness account of the resurrected Christ, right? Paul claims to have seen Christ. I read that to you there in verse 8. And he mentions other people who have seen the risen Christ, who had even seen the risen Christ before the ascension. And this is already circulating in the lifetime of other eyewitnesses. And then, further to this idea that this was all just a hallucination, it's pretty tough already. Just if you just had that one event to try to say that over 500 people saw the exact same thing, well, that's a tough one. But to make it even more difficult, right? Like you could maybe imagine the disciples, the guys who've been with Jesus for 3 years, believed in him, just so totally devastated that, maybe somehow they collectively had a shared hallucination of Jesus coming back, maybe one time, right? And if that was the only claim, we could maybe speculate that's what happened there. But if you read their own accounts, Jesus appeared to them multiple times, right? It wasn't just a one-time thing. He was with them Actually, if you read the gospel accounts, it's consecutive Sundays. He comes back on, he establishes Sunday as the Lord's Day, the day of his resurrection. He comes back again on the following Sunday to them. We have the account where he shows up with them on the beach and he eats some of their fish. Here again, he's trying to prove to them that he's not a ghost. They're all worried, thinking he's just a spirit. That they're seeing something. That's something the gospel even addresses, right? And he says, look, spirits don't have flesh and blood, right? Come, you can touch me. You have that in the accounts. Thomas was the skeptical one who wasn't there when Jesus first appeared, and the other disciples told him what had happened. And Thomas says, no, unless I can touch the place where the nails were and touch the place where the spear had gone into his side, I will never believe. And Jesus shows up to Thomas and says, look here, touch my hands, touch my side. I'm really here. Jesus ate fish, presumably to show that he's not a spirit because, well, ghosts don't eat fish. And so this whole hallucination theory is out. Like, to try to substantiate this, to say that they all had a shared group hallucination multiple times independently, weeks apart, or not independently, codependently, right? All together. And then 500 people all at once on a separate occasion. It stretches beyond the breaking point. So the hallucination theory is out. The idea that they were simply mistaken, I'm not even sure what that would mean, that they thought they saw him but all didn't, or that it was somebody else and like, oh shoot, it wasn't actually Jesus. Like, no, that's pretty silly as well. So just looking at all these historical facts, knowing Jesus actually died, the tomb really was empty, the theory that they made up a lie doesn't hold water, the idea that they were hallucinating doesn't work, all of these things, right? So how then do you account for this? It is historically non-negotiable, I believe, to say that the disciples really believed that Jesus Christ, well, Jesus whom they said was the Christ, had risen from the dead and appeared to them. Right? They really believed that Jesus had risen from the dead and appeared to them. What do you do with this data? What's your explanation? I could add a couple more points as far as these historical facts. Another one you need to try to account for in all of this is the conversion of Jesus's brothers. All right, so John chapter 7 has Jesus's brothers kind of taunting him a little bit. They're goading him, saying, go up to Jerusalem if you want to be a public figure. And it tells us there, his own brothers did not believe in him. Right? You can kind of understand why. Could you imagine having Jesus as your older brother, like actually physically growing up with him? You want to talk about feeling like you're not measuring up, or like your parents are always comparing you to your older brother. It's like, imagine having an older brother who was sinless. So I think we can kind of feel for his brothers at this early point where during his ministry, they didn't believe him. They didn't believe in him. Fast forward after the resurrection, read the book of James. James was the brother of Jesus. And James refers to himself there as a servant, a doulos, slave, bondservant of the Lord Jesus Christ. Right? He is a follower now. He is a believer in his brother. He went from being a skeptic of his brother to believing, read through the book of James and see everything that he believed about his brother, referring to himself even as a slave of his own older brother. Same thing with the book of Jude, another one of his brothers. So what accounts for this miraculous conversion to go from being a skeptic of your brother to declaring yourself to be his slave? Right? That's another piece of evidence you have to try to give an account for. Add to all of this now the scriptural testimony. Right? These aren't just random events. This is sometimes, I think, what goes wrong in some of the conversations around the historical facts is people speak about these things in the abstract as if these are just facts floating out there unmoored and we need to try to give an account for them. We got to put them in their proper context, which truthfully is their redemptive historical context. All of these things, all of these events happened in fulfillment of specific prophecies. Specific prophecies, right? So Paul says this happened in accordance with the scriptures, right? According to the scriptures. Jesus' death and resurrection was specifically prophesied in the Old Testament. Jesus himself had prophesied his own death and resurrection. So, I mean, the very first gospel promise, right, is the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent, right? You go back to the Garden of Eden, you see what happened with Adam and Eve and the world being plunged into sin. What happened at the cross and resurrection is in direct fulfillment to that promise, right? That there is going to be a deliverer, one who will defeat the serpent, one who will defeat the devil. You can find very specific prophecies. Go and read Isaiah 53. Isaiah chapter 53. And it is amazing because it reads like a New Testament document. It reads like something, and you just like, how do you not see Jesus when you read that? Or go read Psalm 22, written by David. This one, it reads like a first-hand account of crucifixion. They have pierced my hands and feet. I can count all my bones. They're all out of joint, right? And then read Psalm 16 or Psalm 2, very specific resurrection prophecies, right? So Peter applies this at Pentecost, and he preaches from Psalm 16. You will not abandon your Holy One to Sheol, or let your Holy One see corruption. And Peter applies it. It's like, well, David died. David's body has seen corruption. So what's he talking about? Well, David was a prophet. He was speaking of the resurrection of Christ. So these aren't just events floating out untethered, that we have to try to make sense of. We actually have the context. It's in fulfillment of the work of redemption that God had begun, that he had started from the very moment of the fall, and actually even before. This is the plan that God had been accomplishing and working out through all of history. So you put all of this together, the scriptural testimony, all the historical facts that were given, the direct prophecies that Jesus and the Old Testament made, and the evidence truly is staggering. Jesus really did rise from the dead. More than that, he predicted he would beforehand. More than that, the scriptures had prophesied all of this thousands of years before he was born. So he really is who he said he was. There really is salvation found in him. And so the call goes out to everyone. Repent, believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, and you will be saved. Happy Easter. Thank you for joining me on the podcast. I'll see you again next time. And that's going to do it for this episode of First In, Last Out, and Laughing Loudest. If this has been a blessing to you, I'd ask you to please like and subscribe to the show. Share it with someone else who might be blessed by it as well. Share it on your social media feed. And if you're looking for a church that believes the Word of God all the way down and all the way across, I encourage you to come check out Grace Covenant Church in Altona. Lord willing, see you back here again next time. God bless.